Hello, how are you? I believe you people are fine. Yes, here we are back again. To look at yet another lesson of history. This is your teacher, Busuulwa Joseph, and today we are dealing with history 241-1, and it is history that deals with East Africa. This is our lesson 1 in this phase, but in the last 2 phases we've actually been looking at different things, but in this phase this is our very first lesson. We are continuing from where I left you the other time, right? And today we are now going to look at the German system of administration in East Africa. The German system of administration in East Africa. Now, of course, when we talk about the German system of administration, we are majorly going to look at what we call direct rule. This is what the Germans used in all their colonies in East Africa. Okay. Now, in this lesson, of course, we are going to look at or we are going to know why the Germans used the direct system of administration in East Africa. Why the Germans used this system of administration in East Africa. We are also going to look at the effects of the Germany rule. Okay, the effects of the Germany rule in East Africa. We are going to look at all of that information. Now, the heading you see there is why the Germans used direct rule. Why the Germans used direct rule. But before we look at the reasons why the Germans used direct rule, we need to know what this system is all about. Okay, and the direct rule, of course, we are saying was a system of administration where the Germans themselves administered Africans. It is a system where the Germans themselves administered Africans. It is contrary to the other system of indirect rule, where the colonialists used African chiefs to administer Africans. So here we are looking at the Germans themselves administering Africans. But we are, of course, going to look at Tanzania or Tanganyika of the time, and we are majorly going to look at how the Germans used the Akidas and the Jumbes to administer the people of Tanganyika at the time. Okay, now under indirect rule, actually it should have been direct. Under direct rule, traditional chiefs lost their political power, which was given to the German agents, i.e. the Akidas and the Jumbes. So we are saying under direct rule, okay? Under direct rule, that one I will be clear. Under direct rule, traditional chiefs lost their political power. Indeed, they lost their political power, okay? And the political power was taken up by the Akidas and the Jumbes in Tanganyika at the time. So that's an image of the Akidas and the Jumbes, okay? That's how they used it to dress up. And most of them were actually coming from the coast. And they were used by the Germans to administer the people of the interior in Tanganyika, okay? Now, we have started looking at the reasons. Remember, our heading was why did the Germans opt for direct rule? Why did they go for direct rule? So we are saying the Germans used it because they had used the force to occupy many parts of Tanganyika. Now, in order to maintain their stay, direct rule had to be used. Now, where is the point? The point is the Germans used force to take up many parts of Tanganyika. This means the people in such areas, the people in those areas were not happy with the Germans. And now even the chiefs were not happy, and some of the chiefs were even killed. Okay? Now, they were like, if we are to use the chiefs, These chiefs might betray us. They knew the chiefs were not happy with them. And if they were to use them, they would have betrayed them. So that is the reason why they opted for direct rule. They did not look at African chiefs because they used the force to take up their areas and they were still not happy with the Germans. Okay. Another point goes, the Germans believed that direct rule was the only effective system of administration. Yes, that's what they believed, that direct rule was the only effective system of administration. They looked at indirect rule and to them it was not effective. Are you getting it? So that's why they opted for direct rule. Okay. Now, another point is the Germans believed that direct rule would help them to effectively exploit. I think you've heard that word, to effectively exploit and benefit from African resources. They would get African resources themselves. They would go for African resources themselves. They didn't want to have go-betweens. You understand? So they thought it was the best method if they were to effectively exploit African resources. Now, we have this other point here, that the Germans wanted to impose their superior culture over Africans through direct rule. The Germans wanted to impose their superior culture over Africans through direct rule. I don't know whether you're saying that word, superior culture. Superior culture. So they would effectively impose their superior culture on Africans. Me, I'm actually putting the word superior culture in quotes, in inverted commas. So they would effectively impose their superior culture on Africans by using direct rule. The chiefs, the African chiefs, wouldn't have done it the way they wanted. So that's why they opted for direct rule. Now, another point is the Germans had suffered early revolts and therefore thought to bring harsh Akidas and Jumbes to tame Africans. Yeah, these Tanganyikans, the people of Tanzania, revolted against the Germans. They so much resisted the German rule. Are you getting it? And by resisting the German rule, the Germans now opted for using the Akidas and Jumbes, who were a little bit harsh, okay? And these were to tame Africans. Are you getting it? So I've already told you that they used the Akidas and Jumbes to directly deal with Africans. You understand? So we are saying the Akidas and Jumbes were somehow harsh, and the Germans thought that these ones will tame the Africans. The Africans revolted the Germans. You remember the Hehe rebellion, the Busuulwa rebellion. You understand? And then the Germans were like, we have to do something against these Africans. Okay? So we have this other point here, that Tanganyika lacked centralized kingdoms that would produce enough chiefs to be used in administration. The people of Tanganyika lacked a centralized system of administration. Are you getting it? Or centralized kingdoms that would produce enough chiefs, meaning that there was a lack of enough manpower, okay, on the side of the Africans. That is why the Germans decided to directly administer the Africans. We have this other point here, that the Germans were proud and never wanted to share their administration with Africans. Yes, the Germans were proud. They never wanted to share their administration with Africans. They were looking at Africans as inferior people. And then they were like, we cannot share power with Africans. These ones are supposed to be our subjects. That's why they opted for direct rule. The Germans were also being threatened by the British in Tanganyika. Okay? It is this that made them to adopt direct rule. Yes, the British at one point wanted to take over Tanganyika also. Remember, it was a time for scramble and partition of Africa. The powers from Europe were scrambling for colonies in Africa. Now, there was a time when the British were also competing for Tanganyika. And now, if the Germans were to have Tanganyika in full control, they were to use direct rule in order to outcompete the British. Okay? So we have this other point that the Germans, through the Berlin Conference, acquired the principle of effective occupation. Through the Berlin Conference, they acquired the principle of effective occupation, which could only be achieved through direct rule. We are looking at the principle of effective occupation. Remember, in 1884 to 1885, when they were at Berlin, they actually agreed that any power was to claim ownership of a colony after effectively occupying it. That powers were to claim for full authority over colonies after they've effectively occupied them. Now, here the Germans opted for direct rule because it could show that effective occupation of a colony. In fact, they were fulfilling the terms of the Berlin Conference. Are we getting it? And of course, they are the very Germans that chaired the meeting, and it was even in Germany. It was chaired by Otto von Bismarck. Okay, so that is another reason. Excuse me. Another reason why the Germans used the direct rule in East Africa. We have this one here, that direct rule was a way of creating employment to German settlers. Indeed, it was a way of creating employment to the German settlers. Okay, the positions that would have been occupied by African chiefs were now occupied by the Germans. So it was a system that was to provide employment opportunities to their citizens. Another point is the Germans joined scramble and partition very late. Therefore, to quicken up colonization, direct rule had to be used. Indeed, they joined the scramble and partition very late. In fact, let me tell you this. The person who was leading Germany at the time, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, that is Otto von Bismarck, did not at first believe in acquiring colonies in Africa. He did not believe in acquiring colonies in Africa. And it is even believed that at one time this man said that colonies are not worth a single bone of a German soldier's finger. Colonies are not worth a single bone of a German soldier's finger. That was Otto von Bismarck. But to our surprise, it is this very man that had a conference which was to share, which was to scramble for Africa and then take over Africa peacefully. That was Otto von Bismarck. Now that they joined, the colonization late, they joined the scramble and partition late, they had to quicken up the process by using direct rule. Okay. We have this other point here, that Bismarck's policy of blood and iron greatly inspired the Germans to use force in controlling their colonies. Okay, this force needed direct rule. Now, the Germans were still believing in this policy of blood and iron. It is a policy that was used by Otto von Bismarck together with the von Roon, von Moltke, and the Kaiser at the time. Now, Bismarck is actually credited for having united the Germans and for having fought for the independence of the Germans from the Austrians. Germany got her independence in 1871, and it was greatly due to the effort put in by Bismarck. Now, Bismarck, before 1850, realized that the Germans fought for their unit and they had failed. Now he came on board and he actually told the people of Prussia by then, because Prussia in Germany was the leading state. He told the people of Prussia, he told the people of Germany that the great question of the day shall not be solved by speeches and resolutions of the great majority, but by blood and iron. Meaning that he was like, if we are to unite Germany, if we are to fight for the independence of Germany, then we are going to use a policy of blood and iron. Whoever stands in our way, we chop off the head. You understand? That is, of course, shedding blood. Okay? Blood and iron policy. And indeed, the blood and iron policy helped them so much, helped them so much in acquiring their unity and independence in 1871. They fought 3 battles majorly that led them to their unity and independence. 1864, the Danish War; 1866, the Austro-Prussian War; and 1870 to 71, the Franco-Prussian War, which actually led to their unity. And all those are wars, and that is blood and iron. Okay, so now the Germans greatly believed that the blood and iron policy works. And if they were to use the blood and iron policy even in Africa, then they were to use direct rule. Okay, we have this other point here, which by the way, before we look at this other point, this is an image of the man that came up with the policy of blood and iron, and this is Otto von Bismarck. Okay, that's the image of Otto von Bismarck, who actually came up with that policy of blood and iron. So we have this other point here, that Germany wanted to build a strong empire in Africa. Okay, and this could be achieved through the use of direct rule. Germany wanted to build a very strong empire in Africa. And if they were to have this strong empire in Africa, they didn't have to have go-betweens, the chiefs and all that. They were to do it themselves. So they opted for direct rule. We have this other point here, that the Germans were inexperienced in colonial administration, i.e., they were overreacting. They used too much force, and therefore direct rule was the only suitable policy. So they were overreacting. That is what we are saying. They were inexperienced in colonial administration. Remember, they joined the Scrum and Partition late. So for them, they were like, if we are to manage the colonies, I think we should go, or they were like, we should go for the direct rule. Okay, we have this one here, that they feared expenses of training Africans, and therefore they adopted the direct rule. They feared the expenses of training Africans. Remember, for anyone to become an administrator, one needs a training. So for them, they were like, we don't have that money, we cannot train these Africans. So they decided to administer Africans directly. They could not use indirect rule, because indirect rule was being used by their rivals. That is to say, the British. So they were like, the British are using direct rule, we cannot also use direct rule. You understand? So they never wanted to go into what we call bandwagon. The other ones are using direct rule, we should also use that one. So they were like, they are using direct rule, I think we should opt for a different method of administering our African colonies. Okay? Yes, here we are. We've now switched over to the effects of the German rule. We have seen the reasons why they used the direct rule. Now we want to look at the effects. For your information, effects are both positive and negative. You understand? Effects are both positive and negative. And when we are concluding, we need to emphasize that, yes, that the effects were positive and negative. If you can judge, you can also give a judgmental conclusion. They were more negative, they were more positive, something like that. So anyway, we are looking at the effects, and we are saying the system of direct rule led to widespread rebellions in Tanganyika. Widespread rebellions in Tanganyika. Remember, it was a system where they used force. It was a system where they adopted the blood and iron policy from Bismarck. You understand? So we are saying the widely spread rebellions mainly against the Hasha Kidas and Jumbes, e.g. the Maji Maji rebellion, the Hehe rebellion, and all of that. For those that have started with us in this phase, I mean in the first two phases, we looked at the Maji Rebellion, we looked at the Hehe Rebellion, we looked at the Bushi. Oh, okay. Yeah, this was in senior 3. Okay. But of course, we will look at the Maji Rebellion. We will also look at the Hehe Rebellion for the senior 2s. All right. So we are saying widespread rebellions. That is the point. Widespread rebellions simply because of the harsh rule of the Akidas and Jumbes that were used by the Germans. Okay, that is effect number 1. Then effect number 2, it led to the rise of nationalism, as many people started organizing themselves into revolutionary struggles for independence. Okay, the point is nationalism, the desire, the need to be independent politically, socially, and economically. It was a system that so much oppressed the people of Tanganyika. And then they were like, it is a high time we fought for our independence. Okay? We have this other one that chiefs lost their power and authority because it was given to the Akidas and the Jumbes. Yes, we've talked about this. Chiefs lost their power simply because it was given to the Akidas and the Jumbes, meaning that a traditional chiefs became common people. Okay. Yes, there is this one here, that it generally led to loss of independence among Africans. I've used it, but I'm telling you, when answering your exams, avoid the pronouns. Instead of saying it, you put there what is supposed to be put there. Okay. The rule, the type of the direct rule generally led to loss of independence among Africans. That is true. That is true. The people of East Africa, the people of Africa, of course, were taken over. Remember, this is direct ruling, meaning that those that have been in power, automatically power goes and it is taken up by the Germans. We have this one here, that the system also destroyed the tribal institutions in Tanganyika. Very true. The system destroyed the tribal institutions in Tanganyika. These tribal institutions, for information, were majorly led by chiefs. Okay? And the chiefs lost their power. Now, when chiefs lose their power, now who will be the leader of these tribal institutions? Okay? So, tribal institutions were destroyed. Many Africans lost their lives in the course of resisting German rule. Very true. Many Africans lost their lives in the course of resisting German rule. That is expected. It is rare to find a war and we do not register loss of lives. Okay. Then there is this one here. Famine and hunger broke out in Tanganyika as Africans were forced to grow cash crops and through the scorched earth policy. Africans were instead growing cash crops instead of food crops, and this resulted into famine and then hunger. Okay, and again the use of the scorched earth policy. Remember, this is a policy where everything is destroyed, including crops in the gardens. So this resulted into famine. Yes, we have this one also, that Germany rule made Africans to live in great fear and panic. Made Africans to live in great fear and panic. Of course, they didn't know what was coming next. So they were living in a state of uncertainty. You understand? So that one contributed to fear and panic. Another point is Africans lost large chunks of land due to high numbers of German settlers. Okay? Due to high numbers of German settlers, hence Africans became squatters. Okay? So Africans lost their land to the German squatters, and then Africans became squatters. Indeed, Africans were defeated. That one you must know. Africans were defeated, and of course, after defeating them, their land was taken. meaning that this was to put Africans into poverty for so many years because they lost their land on which all economic activities are being carried out. Okay. We have this one also, that African culture and customs were eroded in preference for Western culture. Yes, African culture and customs were eroded in preference for Western culture. You can imagine the language we are using now. Even the English I'm using right now, that is someone else's culture. So we are saying African culture and customs were eroded in preference for Western culture. There is this one also, that it led to the development of infrastructure like roads and railways, which is the transport. Okay, development of infrastructure. Yes, these people were developmental, by the way. They were developmental, though I won't go into details of why they came up with roads and all that, but they at least developed in infrastructure like roads, railways, and this is an example of the roads that were, that were constructed. Some of them are being constructed right now, but these roads are actually emerging up from the routes they were using at the time. So the routes ended up being developed into such better infrastructures. There is this one also, that Western civilization was promoted through building of Christian churches and schools. Very true. Okay, Western civilization was promoted, and this was through building of Christian churches and schools. And that is where we of course adopted the Western culture, and then African culture was eroded. Okay, there is this one also, that it led to widespread of Christianity, except at the cost that was deeply rooted into Islam. Yeah, spread of Christianity into the interior, apart from the coast which was deeply rooted into Islam. German administrators undermined traditional culture and Islam. Yeah, i.e., they entered mosques with dogs and boots, raped African women, and gave asylum to a boy who had seduced the king's wife. You remember Chief Mukwawa, there was a boy that actually seduced his wife, and the boy was given asylum by the Germans. So all this was undermining African traditional culture. Okay. There is this one here, that Africans were subjected to forced labor on white plantations and public works for long hours. Very true, very true. Africans were subjected to forced labor on the plantations of the whites. Germany rule in Tanganyika divided Africans into two classes, i.e., collaborators and resistors. Very true. There are those that collaborated with the Germans, and there are those that resisted. So Africans were divided into two. There was a group of resistors and then a group of collaborators. It led to widespread destruction of property, such as houses, plantations. Yeah, remember there was some fighting, of course. And as they were fighting, then property was being destroyed. Okay. In 1904, however, the Germans abandoned direct rule and took over indirect rule. In 1904, the Germans abandoned direct rule and then took over, or took on what we call indirect rule. They realized that it was somehow expensive, and they didn't have the manpower to do it. Okay. Then here we are, as usual. We conclude with a very simple question. It is also here, which goes that why did the British use indirect rule in Tanganyika? That is a very simple question for people to do. And we have our Google Classroom. When you do that simple exercise, you upload it onto our Google Classroom, and the code is just down there. You use that code to upload your work on that platform. Thank you so much for listening to me. Okay, and please do not forget to check out on the playlist below for other recent lessons you may have missed. Okay, there is a playlist below there. You click on it, and then again, you don't forget to subscribe in order to get more upcoming lessons. Do not forget to subscribe. So many subjects are still coming. You understand? We are still giving you a lot. We are still giving you a lot. Please make use of it. So may the good Lord bless you. And of course, at the bottom, I've got my telephone number and my email address. Okay. For now, bye bye. Have a blessed week.